So why do we need church buildings and organized religion? For many years as a Protestant, I really rebelled against organized religion. In fact, even though I participated in a lot of local Protestant churches, I taught Bible studies, I taught Sunday school, I preached when the pastors were out of town occasionally. I was heavily involved in a lot of Protestant churches, but I never once wrote my name on a membership. I thought that was man-made organized religion. And here I am, a Catholic. How'd that happen? So I want to start off by reading just a short little thing. It's from this book, Four Witnesses. It's Clemente Rome from like 90 AD. He was our fourth pope. He was taught by St. Peter, I believe, discipled him, if I'm not mistaken. Ignatius of Antioch, he was discipled by St. John from the dude who wrote the Gospel of John. Justin Martyr lived around 140 AD, and Irenaeus of Lyons came right after him. So all these Christian leaders were well before Constantine legalized religion in the world, Emperor Constantine. And before I was a Catholic, I thought that Constantine changed a lot of the teachings and all. But if you read these guys' words, their own words, you can see these guys were Catholic. I mean, the early church was definitely Catholic. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about why we have buildings and organized religion. So I'm going to read, the author puts in a little paragraph here from Henry Siekiewicz. And he's a church historian, and he put together a lot of research to see what the church was like around 50 to 60 AD when Clement converted to Christianity. And he said it was a lot like this. So this isn't an actual event that happened, but he writes it like in a style of a novel, like it did happen, but it's just showing you what a church service would look like. So this Roman pagan snuck into a church service, pretending he was a Christian just to see what it was like. They walked by way of Viscus Patricius along the Viminal, near the plain on which Diocletian later built his famous baths. Then running to the left towards the Via Salaria, they found themselves among the sand pits and graveyards. So now they're at a cemetery, basically. At the gate of the cemetery, two men accepted the password. So you had to know a password to get in. You weren't just getting in. And then they entered within. The crowd was huge, so they all had to gather outside of the crypt itself. Someone lighted some torches, made a pitch around the crypt, and suddenly it became much lighter and warmer. Songs were sung now at different locations. Vinicius had never heard such songs before. The music soon filled the whole cemetery, penetrating it and immense, as if together the people, the pits, the hills around the whole region itself was filled with yearning. Vinicius had seen many different temples in Asia Minor, Egypt, as well as in Rome. But here, for the first time, he heard people, not fulfilling some kind of ritual, but calling from the heart with sincere yearning as children seeking their father or mother. One had to be blind not to see that these people not only honored their God, but also loved him with their hearts and soul. Vinicius had never seen anything like it. Meanwhile, more torches were lit, and it became lighter still. At the same time, an old man who wore a hooded mantle with a bald head, came from the crypt. He mounted a stone in order to be seen by all. The crowd swayed before him. Voices near Vinicius whispered, "Peter, Peter." Some knelt, others extended their arm towards him. There followed a silence so deep that one heard every charred particle that dropped from the torches, the distant rattle of the wheels on the Via Nomentia, and the sound of the wind through the pines which grew close to the cemetery. One of his companions bent toward Vinicius and whispered, "This is he, the foremost disciple of Christ, the fisherman." So that's how it could have happened. Based on history, Christians in the first century, after Christ died, they had to meet in secret. And yes, they met in some homes, but as Christianity grew, they met in places like graveyards and caves, and they had to hide out. In fact, the Christian symbol you see on a lot of people's cars, the fish, came out of the 2nd and 3rd centuries because if they wanted to know if they could trust you, you would draw a secret symbol, the fish, in the sand, or they would have a sand by their meeting place so they knew that you were a Catholic Christian, that you weren't some Christian who denied the divinity of Christ per se, or that you were a pagan, you know, because back then there were Jews, Christians, and pagans. And the Christians were the ones being persecuted. The Pharisees wanted these Christians annihilated. So the Pharisees had informed Rome that these people were rebels, and the Romans, you know, wanted to kill them all. So yes, the early Christians, the early church didn't have beautiful buildings and cathedrals like we have today. So why should we have them? Well, that's the same thing that the Amish say. You know, the Amish are Christians, and they say, you know, the Bible and the New Testament, they didn't have cars, so why should we have them? Literally, that's their argument. So, you know, the Church of Christ, Protestant denomination, says the early church didn't use instruments, so we shouldn't use instruments. So if you go into Church of Christ, they'll have beautiful songs, but there'll be no instruments ever in a Church of Christ service. Although biblically they're wrong, because King David in the Psalms said, praise the Lord with the lyre and the harp and cymbals, basically drums, guitar, stringed instruments, you know. So praise the Lord loudly is what the psalmist is saying. So that's a whole other issue. But then you say, okay, so I can see us having buildings, you know, like after the Edict of Milan, when I believe that's what it's called, Constantine legalized religion. And if you're not familiar with Constantine, you can check out one of my videos, Did Constantine Create the Catholic Church? All he did was legalize it and just said, we're not going to kill you for being Christians. It wasn't like 50 or 60 years later, it became the official religion of Rome. And when that happened, the government started converting pagan temples and allowing the church to use them for church service, because now the church has grown so big, they needed big, you know, buildings to meet. And so all the church did was just convert these buildings into churches and consecrate them. Just like, you know, a lot of times Christians will take a storefront and make it into a church. So that's all they did, you know, basically just convert these buildings. I mean, what pastor today wouldn't take a free building, you know, and just convert it into a Christian building of their denomination? So that's all that was. But you say, okay, well, don't you think the church went overboard? They put all their time and energy to make these beautiful cathedrals. Well, thank God for the beauty of these cathedrals. If the iconoclast, and I made a video about statues and how the iconoclasts, these were Christians who thought all symbols and statues were evil. They didn't believe in matter. They thought everything should be spiritual. So they were destroying beautiful art, destroying beautiful statues and buildings. John Chrysostom in like the 700s or 800 AD condemned that as a heresy, and the church said that was heretical. Iconoclast is heretical. And then even like Martin Luther and the Reformers, they would destroy Catholic churches as well. And they destroyed a lot of beautiful Catholic art. They kind of had the same belief. It's one of the reasons you won't find beautiful art in Protestant evangelical churches. Just the way it is. But why did Catholic Christians make such huge cathedrals? Were they into materialism and all? No, not at all. The reason was for the glory of God. In his book, The Sounds of Wonder, historian Eddie Ensley, PhD, who was also a Catholic deacon, explains. So one of the best examples of religious renewal in the Middle Ages was the building of cathedrals. These cathedrals were often built as part of a wave of religious zeal that would sometimes grip whole towns, cities, and regions. A good bit of the work was done by volunteers in an atmosphere of group of charismatic prayer. So these guys were praying in tongues while they were building these cathedrals. And if you didn't know Catholics prayed in tongues, check out my video, The History of the Charismatic/Pentecostal Movement. But, okay, so it has been noted that if all we knew of the Middle Ages were the churches and the cathedrals passed down to us, we would know practically all we need to know about their faith. Richly carved altars, statues, and windows, illuminated with light filtering through stained glass, moved men to a deep experience of God. The queen of cathedrals was Charitress, Its many windows also spoke beautifully of the place of Jesus and redemption. Windows depicting his infancy, his life, and his crucifixion give us a pictorial glimpse of the deep devotion that people that time had to a warmly human Jesus. The first part of the cathedral at Chartres, begun in 1145, was built as a result of a religious revival that swept Normandy. Contemporary accounts describe this revival that began in Chartres and spread to Dives and then throughout Normandy. One letter by a participant, so someone that was there, wrote, Normandy vividly describes this revival in the accuracy of this account. It is attested by other contemporary sources. Charismatic worship, healing services, and a greater call to conversion were all part of this revival. A great amount of the work on the cathedral was done by volunteer labor. The number of volunteer workers seems to have been in the thousands, an astounding figure when it is remembered that the population of Chartres was only 10,000 at this time. The renewal that led to the building of the cathedral was seen as an act of grace on the part of God. So this wasn't, their goal wasn't to build a beautiful cathedral to make more people holy. The beautiful cathedral was out of the abundance of grace that these Christians, these Catholic Christians, were receiving. The charismatic prayers and the healing, and this was like a second Pentecost. This was a revival, a spiritual revival. And what we see, the grace from that left these beautiful buildings. So it wasn't like they built these buildings to get closer to God. The closer they got to God, they're outpouring a love for him, to worship him and honor him with do everything for the glory of God. This is going to be magnificent because this is going to be for the glory of God. That was what was happening at that time. So why do we need an organized religion to meet in these buildings? That's going to be part 2, because if you're anything like me, you're not going to watch a 20-minute video and have a tendency to make these into 20-minute videos. It's supposed to be a 10-minute video. So we're going to say part 2 is coming up next. God bless.